If she touches that Barrett, she's off the mission. For good. That's what the SEAL commander said. Seconds before the medic picked up the 50 cal, locked the bolt and fired into a kill zone swarming with hostiles. What do you do when protocol says stand down, but your gut says pull the trigger or they die? She wasn't a sniper, she wasn't cleared to shoot, but when the ridge fell silent, Eleanor dropped her prone, took the scope, and made the shot that changed everything. This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end, because today, rules broke and history didn't flinch. The digital world, even in a dusty forward operating base in eastern Jordan, had its own ghosts. For Eleanor Kjellstrom, it was the ghost of a message, signed only with the cryptic tag Echo 74. It wasn't a message sent through official channels, but one she had intercepted through a cobbled-together comms terminal she'd salvaged from the wreckage of a non-functional drone. The message was a faint whisper in a sea of encrypted chatter, and it was addressed to no one, yet it held the weight of a premonition. Echo 74, Overwatch vulnerability identified. Tomorrow's convoy route is compromised. She'd first stumbled upon the terminal during an inventory check, destined for the scrap heap. To everyone else, it was a piece of junk. To Eleanor, it was a challenge. She had spent countless hours in the quiet of her off-duty shifts, meticulously rewiring and recalibrating its shattered circuits. Her background wasn't just medicine. It was a lifetime of quiet observation and methodical problem-solving, skills honed under the strict tutelage of a father who believed in mastering every tool, no matter how insignificant it seemed. The terminal, now humming faintly in the corner of her tiny living space, was her silent witness to a world her colleagues knew nothing about. The message flashed on its repaired screen, a stark reality in the dimly lit room. She read the words, and a cold certainty settled in her gut. She knew, with the kind of absolute knowledge that comes from an unspoken truth, that the warning was real, and the vulnerability it spoke of was deadly. Eleanor was a study in contradictions, a gentle presence in a world of hard edges. At 5 feet 4 inches, with the delicate bone structure and fair hair of her Swedish heritage, she seemed out of place among the hardened operators of Commander Colt Rourke's SEAL team. They saw her as a precious, fragile thing, their doc, a younger sister, to be protected from the harsh realities of their world. They meant well, their affection tinged with a condescension they were likely unaware of. To them she was a healer, a gentle hand in a world of violence. To her, this perception was a cage. Every morning her rebellion began before dawn. The base was just beginning to stir, its rhythmic hum of generators and early morning patrols a backdrop to her secret life. While her teammates were sleeping, or in some cases cleaning weapons and planning the day's grind, Eleanor was already awake, her mind engaged in a parallel curriculum. Her quarters were a testament to this duality. On one side, neat rows of sterile medical supplies, meticulously labeled and organized. On the other, hidden under a pile of official medical journals, was her true library, worn annotated copies of tactical shooting guides, ballistics charts she'd meticulously hand-drawn, and books on advanced strategic theory. This was no newfound hobby. It was the continuation of a life's work, a legacy passed down by her father. He was a special operations marksman, a ghost in the forests of Sweden, and he had raised her with a rifle in her hands. She could still feel the cold metal of his Anschutz 22, as he taught her to steady her breath, to find the perfect cadence between heartbeats before squeezing the trigger. He had a philosophy that was both a lesson in marksmanship and a guide for life. Precision is what remains when chaos takes everything else. He didn't just teach her to shoot, he taught her to understand the science of it, the physics of a bullet's trajectory, the effect of wind and gravity. By the time she was 15, she was a national precision shooting champion, her name a quiet legend in the small, focused world of Swedish competitive shooting. Her path was supposed to lead to the Olympics, to a life of quiet glory. But the military called, and the path shifted. And then her father was gone, a training accident stealing him away and leaving her with a legacy and a quiet, burning need to honor it. The small silver locket around her neck was his last gift, and inside his last text message was etched in tiny, almost invisible script, "Precision is what remains when chaos takes everything else." The memory that truly fueled her, however, was not one of triumph, but of failure. On a mission in Afghanistan a few years prior, a young Marine had taken a shot to the leg, a clean hit, but a severed femoral artery. Eleanor was ready, her medical kit prepped, her mind racing through the protocols, but her team leader held her back. "Doc, his position is too hot." "Wait for the all clear," he'd said, his voice firm with a conviction that was rooted in rigid protocol. She waited, watching the tactical display, the minutes stretching into an eternity. By the time the all clear came, it was too late. She had reached him, but he had already bled out. The memory was a persistent ghost in her mind, a constant reminder that her healing hands were useless if she couldn't get to the person who needed them. That was the moment her obsession began, the moment she realized she had to be more than just a medic. She had to understand the chaos, not just react to it, so she could prevent that kind of tragedy from ever happening again. The SEAL's affection for her was genuine, but it was also a form of dismissal. During lunch in the sweltering mess hall, Staff Sergeant Noah Vance, the team's spotter and an affable man with a quick smile, sat across from her. "So, Doc," he said, gesturing with his fork, "heard you were down at the range again last night. Impressive how you can hit the 10 ring with that sidearm of yours." He laughed, a light, easy sound. "Miller says you're a natural. Good for qualifications, keeps the skills sharp, right?" Eleanor smiled faintly, a practiced, non-committal gesture. "Just staying proficient, Staff Sergeant. That's the spirit," Vance said, taking a drink from his water bottle. "My dad always said you don't want a surgeon who can't tie a knot, and you don't want a medic who can't hit a barn door. But hey, leave the real shooting to us knuckle-draggers, okay? We've got this covered." The words were meant to be reassuring, a friendly gesture of protection. But to Eleanor, they were a fresh turn of the knife. They appreciated her basic competence, the same way they appreciated a new piece of equipment that worked as advertised. But they couldn't conceive of a world where she could do more. Her skills were noted, but her potential was systematically ignored. This dynamic was never more apparent than in the tactical briefings. Commander Colt Rourke was a man of steel and stone, a leader who commanded absolute respect. He was fair, but he was a firm believer in the rigid military hierarchy. Specialists had their roles, and those roles were not to be crossed. In the briefing room, Eleanor was a fixture along the back wall, a quiet observer whose only purpose was to take notes on potential casualty scenarios. As Rourke detailed the next day's convoy mission, her mind began a parallel analysis. The team's planned overwatch position was on a high ridge, a textbook spot for security. But from her own quiet studies of the terrain, using satellite imagery and old survey maps she'd acquired, she saw a fatal flaw. A low-lying arroyo just to the east offered a perfect, concealed avenue of approach for an enemy force. It was a sniper's blind spot, a classic tactical vulnerability. The Echo 74% message had simply confirmed her own conclusion. After the briefing, with the other operators already gone, Eleanor approached Rourke. "Sir," she began, her voice carefully measured, "I've been reviewing the tactical maps of the convoy route. I believe there's a significant blind spot on the eastern flank, in the arroyo below the primary overwatch position. If a team were to set up there, they could engage the convoy from a concealed position before MC Allen would even see them." Rourke looked at her, his face a mask of professional patience. "Specialist Kellstrom," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished granite. "Your analysis is noted. But MC Allen's been over that ridge for weeks. He knows the terrain better than anyone on this base. The Overwatch position is secure. I appreciate your initiative, but you're a medic. Your focus needs to be on our team's health, not on tactical planning. Is that understood?" His dismissal was absolute. It wasn't angry or even particularly mean-spirited. It was simply a fact of life, an unassailable truth of their military world. A medic's job was to heal, not to plan. He saw her insight not as a valuable contribution, but as an inappropriate overstep, a sign of a medic who was too interested in things outside her lane. The weight of this dismissal, combined with the ominous warning from Echo 74, was almost unbearable. She left the briefing room, the dread in her gut a sharp physical pain. She knew what was coming. She knew it, but no one would listen. The night before the mission, the base was quiet, the air thick with the dust and diesel fumes of the desert. Eleanor lay awake in her bunk, her mind replaying the day's events. The condescending words of Vance, the polite but firm dismissal from Rourke, and the stark, chilling message on her terminal. She thought of her father and his unwavering belief in the power of precision. She thought of the young Marine, his frantic, desperate pleas over the radio, and the suffocating feeling of being too late. Her hands, trained to save lives, felt useless. She was surrounded by the most elite warriors in the world, yet she felt completely alone, the only one who saw the impending doom. The tactical map she had studied was burned into her mind. She could see the convoy route, the Overwatch position, and the hidden arroyo where the enemy would surely be waiting. She knew the wind patterns, the likely engagement distances, the precise angle of attack. She knew everything that MC Allen didn't or wouldn't until it was too late. The feeling was a suffocating pressure, the burden of a secret she couldn't share. She was a ghost on the base, a medic with the mind of a marksman, caught between her duty to follow orders and her conscience, which screamed that she was failing her team before they had even left. The night stretched on, a long, quiet vigil against a morning that she feared would bring disaster. The first part of a story had been written not in a book, but in the cold, unfeeling data of a cryptic message, and she knew with a terrible certainty that the climax was rushing towards them. The digital ghost of Echo 74% had a chillingly precise memory. The first message was a warning, a disembodied voice speaking of a theoretical vulnerability. But the second message, which appeared on Eleanor's screen 2 days later, was an accusation. It landed with the quiet finality of a bullet strike. A cold, hard fact dropped into the warm, dusty chaos of the base. Echo 74, Overwatch vulnerability confirmed. Grid coordinates 31.543 35.8912 eastern flank of the Wadi al-Nabi. Enemy assets are mobile and establishing new firing positions. The details were what broke the silence. The coordinates, the named Wadi, the confirmation of enemy movement. It was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a clear and present danger, a ticking clock counting down to the moment her team would be exposed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she read the message. The words burned into her mind's eye. This wasn't a warning. It was a desperate plea for recognition. Someone, somewhere, saw the same blind spot she did, and they were trying to send a message to a system that wasn't listening. In a surge of adrenaline and defiance, Eleanor Kellstrom made a decision that would change the course of her career. She, the medic, the quiet observer in the back of the room, would respond. She would not risk her team walking into a kill box without every possible advantage. Her fingers, which were trained to suture wounds and administer IVs with surgical precision, now moved over the salvaged comms terminal with a different kind of focus. She encoded a message using the same obscure protocols she had painstakingly reverse-engineered. It was not a grand tactical plan, but a simple, precise recommendation, a patch as she called it in her mind. Echo 74 acknowledged. Suggest moving primary overwatch 200 meters northwest to higher elevation. Establishes clear line of sight into the wadi. Recommending a secondary overwatch patrol to cover flank. She sent the message, a shot in the dark, a tiny act of rebellion against the rigid hierarchy that defined her life. She was stepping far outside her lane into a world where a medic's opinion was not just ignored, but actively seen as a liability. The thought of being discovered sent a jolt of fear through her, but it was eclipsed by a more profound and immediate terror. The thought of the team, the men who treated her with such gentle, condescending care, being ambushed because no one had listened to the medic. Her act, however, was not as quiet as she had hoped. The small, clandestine world of a military base is a hive of interconnected rumors, a place where the slightest deviation from the norm becomes a subject of intense scrutiny. The whispers began subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the social atmosphere. She first noticed it during a late-night run on the base's dusty perimeter. Normally, the operators who were winding down for the night would offer a casual nod or a friendly "looking good, Doc." But now, they would pause their conversations as she passed, their eyes following her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The easy camaraderie was replaced by a strained politeness, a subtle distancing that was more painful than open hostility. The origin of the whispers, she would later learn, was Sergeant Miller, the range officer. A gruff but good-hearted man, he had a habit of sharing stories about his best shooters. He had been so impressed by Eleanor's discipline and her almost preternatural ability to hit targets, especially with the MK-11, that he had mentioned it to a few of the senior NCOs. "That medic of yours," he'd said to Staff Sergeant Noah Vance one afternoon, "she's got the hands of a surgeon and the eye of a marksman. I've seen SEALs with years of experience who can't shoot like that." Miller meant it as a compliment, a testament to her dedication, but in the rigid, specialized world of special operations, his words were misinterpreted. They weren't a sign of her capability, but of her misplaced priorities. The whispers grew louder, more specific, and more damaging. Her dedication to improving herself was being reframed as an obsession, a sign of a medic who was unhappy with her role, a sign of insubordination. One afternoon, as she was meticulously cleaning her medical bag, she overheard a fragment of a conversation between two operators. "Heard she's spending more time with ballistics manuals than with medical ones," one said in a low voice. "Getting ideas above her station, maybe?" The words were a physical blow, each one a testament to the chasm between her intentions and their perceptions. She wasn't trying to compete with them, she was trying to contribute to them, to make their missions safer, to prevent the kind of tragedies that had haunted her dreams for years. But their assumption was so ingrained, so fundamentally rooted in the structure of their world, that they couldn't see the truth. The pressure mounted until it became impossible for Commander Colt Rourke to ignore. He was a man who lived and died by protocol, and the idea of a medic engaging in tactical training was a violation of that sacred order. It was a threat to the very foundation of his team's operational readiness, a distraction that could cost lives. One morning, Rourke called for her, his face a mask of cold professionalism. He was flanked by two senior NCOs, their expressions unreadable. "Specialist Kjellstrom," he began, his voice devoid of its usual paternalistic warmth. "I've been receiving reports about your off-duty activities. Specifically, your unauthorized use of the shooting range and your apparent obsession with weapon systems and tactical training that are outside your military occupational specialty." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against the silence of the office. She wanted to explain, to defend her actions, to tell him that her training was a form of preparation, a way of fulfilling her medical duties more effectively. But Rourke cut her off with a single firm gesture. "I don't need an explanation, specialist. I need compliance. Your role on this team is clear. You are a combat medic, not a sniper, not a strategist. Your focus is on the health and welfare of this team and nothing else. Effective immediately, your access to the shooting range is revoked. Any further off-duty training that is not related to your medical duties will be considered a serious breach of protocol." The reprimand was swift and devastating. It wasn't an angry outburst, it was a methodical, professional demolition of her hard-won sanctuary. The range was the one place where she could truly be herself, the place where she could honor her father's legacy and quiet the ghosts of her past. Now, even that was gone. She stood at attention, her face a mask of calm professionalism, but inside a world was crumbling. She had been pushed into a corner, her capabilities systematically limited, her motivations misinterpreted. She had been accused of insubordination when all she had ever wanted was to be a more effective member of the team. The true climax of her reprimand came a few hours later, when she was called into a closed-door meeting with Rourke and two senior officers from higher command. The room was small and airless, and the atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension. This wasn't a casual reprimand, this was a formal inquiry, a judgment on her fitness for duty. One of the officers, a grim-faced major, held a file filled with her personnel records and the various reports from the base. "Specialist Kjellstrom," he began, his voice flat and dispassionate. "Your performance as a medic has been exemplary. Your record is stellar. However, we have serious concerns about your priorities. Your behavior suggests that you are unhappy with your assigned role and that you are seeking to operate outside of your lane. This is a liability, not an asset. If this behavior continues, we will have no choice but to reassign you to a non-operational medical unit. Your special operations career and your time with this team will be over." The words hung in the air, a final definitive verdict. They were not just taking away her range access, they were taking away her entire purpose. They were telling her that her passion, her dedication, and her hidden skills were not a strength, but a weakness. She was being punished for the very thing that made her an exceptional soldier. The devastation was so profound it was almost physical. She felt a profound sense of injustice, of betrayal, as if the very system she had dedicated her life to was now turning on her, casting her out for a crime she didn't commit. She was a medic, and that was all she would ever be allowed to be. Back in her small, sterile quarters, she sank onto her bunk, the events of the day replaying in her mind, the reprimand, the formal inquiry, the threat of reassignment. She was alone, her only companions the quiet hum of the salvage terminal and the ghost of her father's memory. She ran her fingers over the silver locket, feeling the cool metal against her skin. The words, his last message, flashed on the dusty screen of her terminal, a silent, defiant echo in the face of her defeat. "Precision is what remains when chaos takes everything else." He had meant it as a lesson in shooting, but it had become a lesson in life. They had taken her range access, they had threatened her career, they had tried to strip her of her purpose. But they could not take away her knowledge. They could not take away the precision of her mind. They could not take away the years of training, the lessons learned, the instinct she had honed since she was a child. The reprimand had not broken her, it had only strengthened her resolve. She would continue to prepare, not on a shooting range, but in the quiet, methodical world of her own mind. She would find new ways to stay sharp, to maintain the discipline of her craft. The chaos was coming, she knew it with a terrible certainty. And when it arrived, she would be ready. The question was, would they be ready to accept her? The final shot had been fired in her career, but the war, the one she knew was coming, had not even begun. And in the quiet of her quarters, with the words of her father as her only comfort, she began to prepare for a fight no one else even knew was coming. The morning air on the Jordanian base was thick with the predictable hum of a routine day. For Commander Colt Rourke's team, it was a day for a convoy protection mission, a task they had performed countless times before. But for Eleanor Kjellstrom, it was a morning steeped in dread. As the team prepared, she was relegated to her medical station, her official role as the doc keeping her separate from the tactical preparations she knew were fatally flawed. The image of the tactical map, the one with the vulnerable eastern arroyo, was seared into her mind. She could almost hear the ghost of Echo 74 whispering its silent warning over the sound of the team's easy banter and the methodical clatter of their gear. She was a Cassandra, cursed with a truth no one would believe, forced to watch the heroes she cared for walk into a tragedy she could have helped them avoid. The mission began like any other. Rourke's voice, a steady and calm force over the comms, gave the final orders. The sniper team, MC Allen and Vance, were deployed to the primary overwatch position. Eleanor listened to their reports, her heart a drum against her ribs. The team's voices were confident, professional, their descriptions of the terrain matching the flawed map in her head. She heard MC Allen's voice, a low rumble of focused concentration as he confirmed his position. Ghost on the ridge position secured, overwatch commencing. She felt a sick certainty that his position was anything but secure. The sun, climbing higher in the eastern sky, cast long shadows that concealed the very threat she had warned them about. For MC Allen and Vance, the mission was a familiar rhythm of discipline and patience. They were a well-oiled machine, their movements synchronized by years of shared experience. Vance, the spotter, meticulously scanned the terrain below, his binos glued to his eyes, his voice a quiet stream of information to MC Allen. He called out landmarks, potential choke points, and movement in the distance. MC Allen, the ghost, was a silent sentinel behind his Barrett, 50 caliber. The massive rifle, a weapon of devastating power and terrifying precision, was a natural extension of his will. They had a clear line of sight over the convoy route, a stretch of open desert that was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it offered no place for the convoy to hide, and a curse because it offered no place for the enemy to hide either. The rhythm was hypnotic, a quiet dance of vigilance and patience, but the rhythm shattered without warning. The attack wasn't a firefight, a slow escalation of engagement and counter-engagement. It was a sudden, violent intrusion of chaos, a precise and devastating strike from the very arroyo Eleanor had identified. The sound was a thunderclap, the crack of a mortar shell followed by the ear-splitting shriek of shrapnel tearing through the air. The explosion was not a direct hit, but an indirect one. A precise shot meant not to kill, but to maim and suppress. The blast tore through the ground just behind their position, throwing McAllen violently against the rocks. The Barrett, his pride and his tool, was sent tumbling to the ground, its powerful form rendered useless. "Ghost is down! Ghost is down!" Vance's voice, a scream of pure adrenaline and terror, tore through the comms. His calm professional demeanor was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching his partner bleed out. "Shrapnel! Williams is down! He's hit his arm. He can't." The rest of the message was lost in a burst of frantic static and the rat-tat-tat of a suddenly escalating firefight. The enemy, having secured the element of surprise, was now moving to finish the job. Vance, a spotter by trade, found himself a lone rifleman, firing his M4 to suppress the advancing enemy, while his partner, his closest friend, lay bleeding on the desert floor. Back at the command center, the radio calls were a maelstrom of confusion and fear. Eleanor in her medic station felt her blood run cold. She listened, her mind racing, as the fragmented messages painted a terrifying picture. Williams is down, Barrett compromised, and most horrifyingly heavy enemy movement. We're being flanked. It was the exact scenario she had warned them about, the blind spot she had seen on her makeshift terminal. She heard Commander Rourke's voice, strained and hard, trying to make sense of the chaos. He barked orders, requested air support, and called for ground reinforcements. But the grim reality was, air support was delayed by a sudden sandstorm, and ground reinforcements were a full 40 minutes out. A new voice, the frantic tone of a convoy commander, cut through the noise. "Base, this is convoy lead. We are 15 minutes from the kill zone. Do we have our overwatch? We're hearing heavy fire on the ridge. Repeat, do we have our overwatch?" The question hung in the air, a sword of Damocles hanging over the entire mission. 15 minutes. The convoy, filled with vital supplies, was a sitting duck, and Rourke's team, the designated Guardians, was bleeding out on a ridge. For Eleanor, the choice was no longer a question of protocol. It was a question of life and death, of conscience and consequence. Her father's words, his final message, echoed in her mind. Precision is what remains when chaos takes everything else. The chaos was here. The precision, the solution was within her. The team was down, the weapon was useless without a wielder, and the clock was ticking. The military hierarchy that had caged her, that had dismissed her as just a medic, was now threatening to cost lives. A moment later, she was running, her medical bag thumping against her side, towards the command center. She burst through the door, the intense focus of the room a physical pressure against her skin. Rourke was bent over the tactical map, his face a grim mask of concentration. She knew he was calculating, weighing impossible odds, trying to find a solution where none existed within the framework of their established rules. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "I'm volunteering to take MC Allen's position." Rourke's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief, then narrowing into a gaze of pure, unfiltered fury. "Specialist Kjellstrom, this is not the time for insubordination. We are in the middle of a tactical crisis, and your place is in the medical bay, standing by to receive our wounded. Get back to your station, now." "Sir, with all due respect," she said, her voice unwavering, a testament to months of mental preparation for this exact moment. "Reinforcements are 40 minutes out. The convoy is 15. There is a 200-meter firing window that MC Allen's position cannot cover, and it's where the enemy is operating from. That's the vulnerability Echo 74 warned us about, and it's the one they are exploiting now." She could see the shock register on his face. She had not only broken protocol by speaking out, but she had also revealed a knowledge of tactical vulnerabilities she had no right to possess. But she didn't stop there. She laid out her case, her words a torrent of logic and desperate reason. "The Barrett is in place. It's sighted. I've studied the ballistics, I know the weapons capabilities, I know the terrain. I'm a precision shooter, sir. I can make those shots, and I can save that convoy. And I can treat McAllen's wound when I get there." Rourke's face was a mixture of disbelief, professional outrage, and a glimmer of impossible hope. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But the years of protocol, the rigid hierarchy, the established order of things, all screamed that this was a terrible idea, an act of sheer madness. He was a commander, and he would not, could not, put a medic on a sniper rifle, not in the middle of a live combat zone. Absolutely not, specialist! "I will not compromise this mission further by having an unqualified medic attempt a sniper operation. That is an order. Get to your station, now!" His voice was a whip crack, the absolute authority of his command hanging in the air like a death sentence. The dismissal was final, but Eleanor, who had spent months preparing for this moment, knew that the order was wrong. She knew that protocol was about to kill people. She nodded, her face betraying none of the emotion boiling inside her. "Understood, sir." She turned and walked out of the command center, not back to her medical bay, but toward her quarters. The mission was already lost in their minds, but in hers it had just begun. The rules of engagement had been written on a map, but the new rules, the ones she was about to write, would be written in the sand. And she knew with a quiet, fierce certainty that the only thing left to do was to save them all, whether they wanted to be saved by her or not. The walk from the command center to her quarters was not a physical journey of 25 meters, but an emotional journey of a lifetime. With every step, Eleanor Kellstrom felt the full weight of Rourke's refusal and the crushing authority of his command. She had made her case with every ounce of reason and logic she possessed. But in the end, it was not her logic that mattered. It was her title. She was a medic, and therefore she was nothing more. The professional anger in Rourke's eyes, the quiet fury of a commander whose authority had been challenged, told her all she needed to know. She was on her own. The decision had been made for her. Now she would make her own. Back in her sterile, quiet quarters, the contrast between the world she had just left and the one she now entered was stark. In her mind, the battlefield was raging, the air thick with the smell of cordite and the screams of men. But here the air was cool and still, the only sound the faint hum of her salvaged comms terminal. The light from its dusty screen illuminated the room, a silent witness to her final act of preparation. This was not a moment for second thoughts or a final desperate plea for permission. This was a moment of action, of turning years of quiet dedication into a single defiant act. Her hands moved with a methodical, practiced rhythm that belied the turmoil in her mind. First, her medical bag. This wasn't the standard issue kit. It was a masterpiece of clandestine customization. She'd spent months trading favors, bartering with logistics specialists, and using her own quiet ingenuity to acquire specialized equipment. She packed a compact, powerful field tourniquet, a set of advanced pressure dressings designed for high-velocity ballistic wounds, and a portable blood-clotting agent that wasn't standard issue for field medics. This was her primary duty, the oath she had sworn. She was still a medic, but she was about to become more. Next, from a compartment hidden beneath her bunk, she pulled out her secret arsenal. It was not a collection of firearms, but a collection of tools, each one a testament to the life she had been forced to hide. She packed her personal custom optics set, a piece of equipment she had painstakingly calibrated herself, which offered a degree of precision and clarity that far surpassed her issued binoculars. She slipped a worn, spiral-bound notebook into her pocket, its pages filled with her own meticulously drawn ballistics charts, hand-calculated and verified through months of secret study. Finally, she put on a set of tactical gloves she had acquired through a quiet trade. They offered more than just protection. They offered a sense of connection, a physical link to the world of precision and control that she was about to enter. Every item was a whisper of her true self, a testament to the fact that while they saw her as a medic, she had always been a marksman at heart. Her journey from the base to the ridge was an unauthorized race against a ticking clock. The tactical display in the command center had given her the brutal facts. The convoy was less than 10 minutes from the kill zone, and MC Allen and Vance were still under heavy fire, pinned down and fighting for their lives. She slipped out a side gate, a place where security was more relaxed, her medic's uniform and the unassuming nature of her gear allowing her to pass unnoticed. The vehicle she used was a standard transport, a dusty white pickup that drew no attention as she drove away from the familiar hum of the base and into the vast, unforgiving silence of the desert. She kept her eyes on the road, but her mind was on the topography of the land, the lay of the ridge, the contours of the arroyo. She had studied this terrain for months, her knowledge of its hidden paths and secret valleys, now the very thing that would allow her to survive. She drove until the sound of distant gunfire became a low, persistent roar on the wind. She parked the vehicle in the shadow of a forgotten rock formation, a place where it would be safe from observation, and began her final approach on foot. The terrain was treacherous, a jagged, unforgiving landscape of loose rock and sharp, thorny brush. Her physical conditioning, the long, grueling runs, and the strength training that her teammates had dismissed as a strange quirk was now the only thing keeping her from falling behind. She moved with the quiet efficiency of a hunter, her feet finding purchase on the loose shale, her body a low, swift form against the backdrop of the setting sun. She was no longer a medic making her way to a casualty collection point. She was a soldier, a shadow, a force of will moving toward a moment of truth. As she reached the base of the ridge, the sounds of battle were no longer distant echoes. They were a visceral, immediate symphony of violence. The crack of an M4, the deep, guttural thrum of an enemy's automatic weapon, the frantic, desperate shouts of men engaged in a struggle for their lives. She keyed her comms, a direct line to Vance, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of chaos. "Vance, this is Doc. I'm on the ridge. I'm with you. Be advised, I am armed, and I am in a position to assist." The response was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a torrent of confused and panicked shouts. "Doc, what the hell? Get back! We're under heavy fire. This is not a safe position." But before Vance could finish, she was there. She crested the ridge, her form a flash of motion, her medical bag a comforting presence on her hip. The sight that greeted her was a living nightmare, the exact scenario she had seen in her dreams. MC Allen lay bleeding, his right arm shattered, his face a mask of pain. Vance was firing from behind a low pile of rocks, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his eyes wide with a combination of fear and disbelief. And there, next to them, lay the Barrett. Cal, a silent sentinel of a broken promise, its powerful barrel pointed uselessly at the sky. Eleanor moved with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking to behold. She dropped her medical bag and immediately knelt beside MC Allen, her hands moving with the soft, practiced precision of a surgeon. She stabilized his wound, applying a powerful pressure dressing and a tourniquet with a calm authority that silenced Vance's frantic shouting. "Stay with me, MC Allen," she murmured, her voice a low, reassuring hum. "I'm here now. You're going to be okay." She was a medic fulfilling her duty, her hands a source of healing and comfort. Then, the transformation. She rose to her feet, her gaze moving from the wounded man to the silent, powerful rifle. The Barrett 50 cal was a force of nature, a weapon of such brutal efficiency that it demanded respect. She moved to it, her touch not one of a medic, but of a marksman. A hand reconnecting with a tool it had been trained to use for a lifetime. Vance looked at her, his eyes a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Doc, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of the battle. Eleanor Kjellstrom didn't answer. She lay down behind the Barrett, her body settling into the prone position with a sense of innate correctness, as if she had been born to it. She was no longer a medic. She was a sniper. The scope, a dark eye into the chaos below, revealed her targets, a group of enemy fighters moving through the arroyo, the very blind spot she had warned them about. She heard the words of her father echo in her mind, a final clear lesson in the face of absolute chaos. Precision is what remains. She drew a deep, steadying breath, found the calm between her heartbeats, and settled her crosshairs on the first target. The chaos was here, and she was ready. She squeezed the trigger, the roar of the Barrett. .50 caliber was not just a sound, it was a physical force, a shockwave that slammed into Eleanor Kihlstrom's shoulder and sent a tremor through the very bones of the ridge. Her body, trained for months to absorb such immense power, held firm. She had practiced this 1,000 times in her mind, and now, in the brutal reality of a combat zone, the mental became the physical. Her hands, calloused not just from medical work, but from the quiet discipline of her secret training, held the rifle steady. Through the scope, she saw the shot land. The enemy fighter, a dark shape moving through the dust of the arroyo, was instantly vaporized, his threat to the convoy eliminated with a terrifying surgical finality. The silence that followed the deafening crack of the rifle was more profound than any she had ever known. It was broken only by the sharp, ragged breaths of Noah Vance. For a moment he was frozen, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a confusion so absolute it bordered on panic. He had just watched the team's medic, the woman he had treated like a little sister, fire a weapon he had assumed she had only read about, and she had done so with a precision that was beyond anything he had ever witnessed in his years as a spotter. His world, a universe built on the rigid lines of military hierarchy, had just been shattered. He looked at the smoking barrel of the Barrett, then back at Eleanor, and the confusion on his face slowly began to morph into something else, a dawning, terrible, and absolute respect. "Doc?" he whispered, his voice a disbelieving gasp. "What the hell was that?" Eleanor did not answer. There was no time for explanations, no time for the monumental reality of what she had just done to sink in. She immediately transitioned. Her hands, which had just gripped the heavy rifle, now moved with a medic's practiced grace. She reached for MC Allen, her attention shifting from the enemy outside to the ally bleeding beside her. She checked his tourniquet, felt for a pulse, and quickly reassessed the damage to his shattered arm. The blood, a warm, slick reality against her gloves, was a stark reminder of her primary mission. Her dual identity, a constant battle she had fought in secret, was now a public, desperate necessity. She was a marksman, and she was a medic, and in the chaos of this battlefield, the two roles were finally, seamlessly, one. The enemy, however, was not so easily dissuaded. They were a trained, disciplined force, and the sudden, devastating loss of one of their forward elements only galvanized them. They began to adapt. The sound of more incoming mortar fire filled the air, the explosions now a little closer, forcing Eleanor to press her body low against the hard rock of the ridge. They were trying to suppress her, to force her to retreat, to make her impossible shots impossible. But they did not know her. They did not know the years she had spent training for this very moment, a moment when chaos was the only reality and precision was the only hope. "Incoming!" Vance shouted, his voice finding its professional rhythm once more, a signal that he was slowly beginning to accept this impossible reality. "Multiple targets, 10 o'clock, moving between cover, they're using smoke!" Eleanor's eye was back in the scope, her mind a whirlwind of numbers and calculations. She had studied smoke, she had studied wind, she had studied the physics of a bullet's trajectory through atmospheric interference. She was no longer just seeing targets, she was seeing vectors, probabilities, and the very anatomy of the men she was about to engage. Her medical knowledge, which had always felt so separate from her tactical training, now informed her every shot. She knew where to aim to achieve maximum stopping power, how to neutralize a threat with a single devastatingly efficient round. It was not a game of simple marksmanship, it was a game of combat medicine, fought with a rifle instead of a scalpel. She squeezed the trigger again, the roar of the Barrett a thunderous affirmation of her new purpose. The second shot landed, and a new wave of silence descended upon the battlefield. MC Allen, his face pale with pain and blood loss, watched her with an expression that was both a testament to his suffering and a dawning professional respect. "Doc," he said, his voice a pained whisper, You have the eye. You have to be my eyes." He was speaking from a place of pure professional need, a place where rank and role no longer mattered. He saw a sniper, and he needed a sniper. The convoy, it's coming through the kill zone now. I have targets, but I can't get to them. Can you get me in position?" Eleanor, her eyes still glued to the scope, a torrent of information flowing through her mind, answered without hesitation. "Vance, give me MC Allen's position. I'll make the adjustments. MC Allen, you're my spotter. Talk to me." And in that moment, an impossible team was born. Vance, the spotter, provided the tactical overview. MC Allen, the wounded sniper, provided the professional guidance and target acquisition. And Eleanor, the medic, was the one who pulled the trigger. They were a three-headed monster of precision and purpose, a team forged in the crucible of a battlefield where protocol had failed and talent had taken its place. For 15 long, agonizing minutes, Eleanor held the ridge. She was a machine of devastating efficiency, a quiet, methodical force of nature. She would fire, the Barrett's roar a constant presence in the air. Then her hands would immediately go to MC Allen's wound, checking his dressings, administering painkillers she had brought with her, and whispering words of encouragement. The two roles were no longer in conflict. They were in a desperate symbiotic dance. She was keeping her teammates alive, both with her healing hands and her deadly aim. Back at base command, the chaos had given way to a new kind of confusion. Rourke, still seething with frustration and anger over his failed mission, listened as a new stream of radio chatter filled the air. The convoy commander, who had been in a state of sheer panic just minutes before, was now speaking with a dawning sense of relief and wonder. "Base, this is convoy lead. We are passing through the kill zone now." Taking scattered fire, but the main threats have been neutralized. "We have Overwatch. Repeat, we have Overwatch. The fire it's surgical. The main ambush positions have been cleared. We are taking some hits, but we are going to make it through." Rourke's face, which had been a mask of grim determination, now contorted into a mask of pure disbelief. He had given up on his Overwatch team. He had been preparing for the worst, for the grim reality of a full-scale assault on the convoy. But now an unknown force, a ghost of precision, was holding the line. He turned to his tactical map, his eyes tracing the path of the convoy, then moving to the coordinates of the sniper ridge. The tactical display showed no friendly fire coming from the ridge. No one was there. He had given up on them. So who was this new, terrifyingly effective sniper? The answer, when it came, was a slow, agonizing dawning of a terrible truth. A junior comms officer, listening to the frantic chatter from the ridge. A conversation between Vance and an unknown voice called out, his voice filled with a disbelieving terror. "Sir, the Overwatch team, they're being led by an unknown contact. The spotter, he's calling out to Doc." The word hung in the air, a single devastating syllable that shattered the illusion of order and control. Doc, the medic, the unqualified, insubordinate young woman he had just reprimanded and threatened with reassignment. He had flatly refused to let her go to the ridge, but the impossible had happened. She had gone anyway. She had disobeyed a direct order, put herself in a life-or-death situation, and was now, against all logic and reason, saving his team. Rourke's mind, a place of ironclad protocol and rigid discipline, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The anger was still there, the rage of a commander who had been disobeyed. But a new emotion was beginning to take hold, a feeling of professional awe, of a commander who had just witnessed an act of impossible skill. He had seen the stats of the sniper fire. It was surgical, precise, and it was happening at ranges and with a devastating efficiency that was impossible for anyone but a true professional. He had told her she was not a marksman, but the radio chatter, The successful passage of the convoy and the sheer brutal facts of the battlefield all screamed a different truth. She wasn't just a marksman. She was a ghost of precision, a warrior who had been hiding in plain sight, a medic who was a marksman, a subordinate who had defied him to save his men. And in that moment he realized that the rules of his world, the rigid lines he had drawn to define who was a healer and who was a killer, had been shattered. The medic had become the sniper, and she had done so with a grace and a skill that was now for all the world to see, saving lives. He slammed his hand down on the tactical table, the sound a final exclamation point on the end of a mission that had changed everything. He needed answers, and he was about to get them. The thunderous thrum of approaching helicopters was not a sound of salvation, but of judgment. On the ridge, the air, which had been thick with the acrid smell of burnt cordite and the screams of a desperate firefight, now filled with the sterile, authoritative roar of rotor blades. For Eleanor Kielstrom, who had just spent 15 minutes balancing the impossible demands of medic and marksman, the sound was a chilling reminder that while the mission was over, the reckoning was about to begin. She remained prone behind the Barrett, her body exhausted, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her hands, still stained with McAllen's blood and the residue of gunpowder, were a testament to her success and a damning piece of evidence for her insubordination. The silence on the ridge was profound, a vacuum in which her actions were about to be weighed, measured, and judged. The first helicopter, a sleek black Chinook, touched down a few hundred meters from their position, its powerful downdraft kicking up a furious cloud of dust and sand. The ramp lowered, and out stepped Commander Colt Rourke. His face, usually a mask of cold professionalism, was now a portrait of a man torn between two worlds. The anger of a commander whose direct order had been disobeyed was warring with the professional awe of a leader who had just witnessed an act of impossible skill. He walked towards the ridge, his strides long and purposeful, his eyes a storm of conflicting emotions. He didn't just see a young medic, he saw a ghost of precision, a warrior who had been hiding in plain sight, a subordinate who had defied him to save his men. The air around him crackled with a tension that was more palpable than any gunshot. As he reached her position, Eleanor rose to her feet, her posture as straight and disciplined as her training would allow. MC Allen and Vance, both now attended to by the medical team that had arrived with the reinforcements, watched in silence. The stage was set, not for a debriefing, but for a public inquisition. Rourke stopped a few feet from her, his gaze locked on hers. He didn't shout, he didn't curse. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, controlled growl, more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "Specialist Kielstrom," he began, the use of her formal rank a cold reminder of the chasm between them. "I believe I gave you a direct order to remain at your station." Eleanor did not flinch. Her voice, though quiet, carried the unshakable certainty of a person who knew they had done the right thing. "Yes, sir, you did?" But the convoy was 15 minutes from the kill zone, and reinforcements were 40 minutes out. MC Allen was wounded, and the Barrett was inoperable. The mission was about to fail, and lives were about to be lost. I had the skills to save it, and I was the only person who could get here in time. I made a judgment call, sir. The simple, unvarnished truth of her statement seemed to take the wind out of Rourke's sails. He wanted to shout, to berate her for her insubordination, for the arrogance of a subordinate defying his command. But the evidence was all around them. He had seen the after-action reports, the confirmation of a dozen enemy casualties, the surgical precision of the shots. He had listened to the joyous, relieved voice of the convoy commander. He had seen his men, his elite SEALs, alive and safe. The facts, cold and unyielding, were on her side. He could not and would not argue with results. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and he saw not just the medic he had dismissed, but the soldier who had proven him wrong. It was in this tense, fragile moment that a new player entered the scene. From the rear of the arriving helicopters, a figure of authority stepped out, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This was Colonel Tamsin Rain, a high-ranking officer from the regional command, whose presence was a clear indication that this was no longer a local incident, but a matter of international importance. Rourke, still wrestling with his inner demons, immediately snapped to attention. "Colonel," he said, his voice a respectful, formal bark. Rain, however, paid him little mind. Her gaze, a sharp and penetrating force, was fixed on Eleanor. She walked past the SEALs, past the other officers, and stopped a few feet from Eleanor, her eyes scanning her with an intense, almost surgical precision. She was not looking for a medic or a sniper, but for something else entirely, something familiar. "Specialist Kellstrom," she said, her voice a low, calm rumble. "I've been reading the after-action reports. 12 confirmed kills and a convoy saved. All from a weapon system you're not authorized to operate, in a mission you were explicitly ordered not to participate in, a medic, a sniper, and a diplomat, all in one. You must be your father's daughter." The words were a hammer blow. Eleanor, who had braced herself for the full force of military justice, felt her knees go weak with a profound and disorienting shock. No one, not Rourke, not Vance, not a single person on that base knew about her father. Her lineage, her life's work, was a closely guarded secret. But this woman, this powerful, high-ranking officer, had seen through the facade and spoken the truth. She was not a stranger, but a ghost from the past, a connection to the man who had been her greatest inspiration. Rain knelt down, her face close to Eleanor's, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I knew him, you know. Back in the day, he was a good man, a precise man, and he taught me a thing or two about crosswind compensation. Did he ever teach you the crosswind trick, the one with the blade of grass?" The question was a test, a key to a secret language that only a few knew. It was a secret that her father had taught her on a quiet, windswept field in Sweden, a simple, elegant method for calculating the drift of a bullet in a crosswind. Eleanor, tears welling in her eyes, finally felt the dam of her composure break. All the years of quiet discipline, the endless hours of secret training, the profound loneliness of being the only person who knew the truth about herself, it all came crashing down in a single cathartic moment. She nodded, a single heartfelt movement. "Yes, ma'am." He did. In that moment, everything changed. The insubordination, the unauthorized mission, the breaking of every rule and every protocol, all of it faded into the background. Tamsin Rain saw not a subordinate who had defied her commander, but a soldier who had fulfilled a purpose she had been born for. She stood up, her gaze now fixed on Rourke. "Commander," she said, her voice filled with a calm, absolute authority. "You have a debriefing to conduct, but it will be done on my terms. This is not an investigation into insubordination. This is a debriefing on tactical success. Specialist Kellstrom will be giving her report, and you will all be listening. I want to know about her methodology, her training, her rationale. This is not about punishment. It's about learning." The formal debriefing, which took place in a makeshift command center back at the base, was a surreal and transformative experience. Eleanor, for the first time in her career, was not relegated to the back of the room, taking notes. She was at the center of it, her voice a calm, professional force, as she laid out her findings, her tactics, and her rationale. She spoke of her knowledge of the terrain, her predictions about the enemy's tactics, and her decision to use the Barrett's immense power to neutralize the threat from the Arroyo. She spoke of her hidden training, not with a sense of defiance, but with a sense of professional necessity, of a skill set she had honed to be ready for a moment just like this. Rourke and Vance, initially skeptical, listened in stunned silence as she laid out the intricate, logical, and devastatingly effective details of her plan. She wasn't just telling them what she had done, she was showing them that her actions were not reckless, but the result of a profound and disciplined training that had been hiding in plain sight. The conclusion of the debriefing was not a verdict, but a revelation. Rourke, a man of rigid protocol and discipline, found himself at a crossroads. The rules he had lived by, the lines he had drawn between a medic and a sniper, had been blurred forever. He had been proven wrong in the most public and dramatic way possible, but he had also witnessed a miracle. He had seen a single soldier, a young medic, take on a mission that no one else could and succeed where every other plan had failed. He saw not a subordinate who had defied him, but a soldier who had saved him. The implications were profound. This was not just about Eleanor. It was about the future of special operations, about the need for a new kind of soldier, a soldier who was more than just a single specialized role. As the meeting concluded, Rain turned to Eleanor, her eyes filled with a quiet, knowing admiration. "You've done more than just save a convoy, specialist," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "You've made a choice, and that choice has consequences, good consequences. Your father would be proud." The words were a benediction, a validation of a life spent in secret, of a talent that had been hiding in the shadows. The medic had stepped into the light, and now, for the first time in her life, she was no longer just a medic. She was a sniper, a soldier, and a hero, and her career, which had been on the verge of being ended by a single act of defiance, was now about to begin. The final chapter of her story was not a tale of punishment, but of a revolution of one. The formal inquiry was not a court-martial, but a conference. It was a testament to the quiet, subtle influence of Colonel Tamsin Rain, who had reframed the entire event from an act of insubordination into a case study in tactical innovation. The room was sterile, a stark contrast to the dusty, bloody ridge where the story had truly unfolded. A panel of senior officers, their faces a mixture of skepticism and professional curiosity, sat at a long table, their files on the incident open before them. For the first time in her career, Eleanor Kjellstrom was not in the back of the room, a silent, ignored presence. She was at the center, her voice a calm, professional force as she laid out the facts. She spoke not of defiance, but of professional necessity. She detailed her years of training under her father, a special operations marksman. She spoke of the Afghanistan mission that had cost a young Marine his life, and of the profound lesson she had learned that being a medic was not enough if she couldn't get to the wounded. She told them about her off-duty training, her meticulous study of ballistics and tactical theory. And she spoke of the Echo 74 warnings, the ghost messages that had first alerted her to the fatal flaw in their mission plan. She laid it all out, her words a torrent of logic, data, and unassailable truth. It was a defense not of her actions, but of her capabilities, a professional case for a soldier who had been hiding in plain sight. She was not a subordinate who had defied her commander. She was a soldier who had fulfilled a purpose she had been born for. The room, which had begun with a quiet skepticism, was now filled with a stunned, respectful silence. The first testimony was from Staff Sergeant Reed Ghost MC Allen. He entered the room, his arm in a sling, his face pale with pain and fatigue, but his eyes were filled with a cold, professional fire. He was a veteran, a master of his craft, and his words carried the weight of 15 years of experience. He spoke of the ambush, the chaos, the terror of watching his partner get hit. He spoke of the moment he realized the Barrett was useless, of the dawning sense of certain defeat. But then he spoke of Eleanor's arrival. He described her as a professional, a force of nature, a soldier who had balanced the impossible demands of medic and marksman. with a grace and a skill he had never seen before. "I've served with SEAL snipers for 15 years, he said, his voice raw with emotion and professional admiration. "I've seen the best of the best, and I've never seen shooting like that. She wasn't just a shooter, she was a sniper. She saved me, she saved Vance, and she saved that mission. She is a natural, a talent you cannot train. You can only discover it." The words were a benediction, the ultimate validation from a master of the craft. Next was Noah Vance. He spoke not of the technicalities, but of the human reality. He described his disbelief the moment he thought he was going mad, seeing the medic he had treated like a little sister suddenly become a warrior of impossible skill. He spoke of the fear, the confusion, and the profound relief of watching her take her position and begin to shoot. He spoke of the quiet confidence she exuded, of the calm in her voice as she called out targets and adjusted her aim. He ended his testimony with a simple, unvarnished truth. "We thought she was just a medic," he said, his voice filled with a powerful and humbling sincerity. "We were wrong, we were arrogant, and she saved our lives because of it. We all owe her. And the military owes her for teaching us a lesson we should have learned a long time ago." The final testimony was from Commander Colt Rourke. This was the moment of truth, the climax of his own personal journey. He walked to the front of the room, his posture ramrod straight, his face a mask of professional resolve. He was a man of protocol, and he had been defied in the most public and dramatic way possible. But he had also witnessed a miracle. He had seen a soldier, a subordinate he had dismissed and reprimanded, save his men and his mission. He had been proven wrong, but in a way that had saved lives. He looked at the panel, at the grim-faced officers waiting for his verdict, and he began to speak. "I stand by my decision to order Specialist Kjellstrom to remain at her post," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "It was the correct decision, according to the protocols we have lived by for decades. Her actions were an act of insubordination, a clear violation of a direct order. However," he paused, his gaze shifting to Eleanor, a look of profound, dawning respect in his eyes. "However, her actions were also an act of exceptional skill and professional courage. She did what no one else could. She possessed a skill set that was hidden, and she used it to save lives when our established protocols had failed. We are not just a military of rules, we are a military of results. And her results are undeniable. The rules we have lived by, the lines we have drawn between our specialists, are based on an old understanding of what a soldier can be. But Specialist Kjellstrom has shown us a new way. She has shown us that a medic can be a sniper, that a healer can be a killer, that one person can be more than one thing. So I will say this to the panel: I was wrong. I was wrong to dismiss her. And sometimes the chain of command needs to learn from the field." The words were a thunderclap, a radical, revolutionary statement from a man who had been a symbol of the old way of thinking. He had not just pardoned her, he had championed her. He had taken the blame for his own arrogance and used it as a lesson for the entire military. The verdict, when it finally came, was a foregone conclusion. Colonel Rain, her eyes filled with a quiet, knowing satisfaction, read the decision of the panel. The panel has found that while Specialist Kjellstrom's actions were a clear violation of protocol, they were a necessary and life-saving act of exceptional skill and judgment. The charges of insubordination have been dropped. Furthermore, the panel has recognized the need for a new way of thinking in special operations. She looked at Eleanor, a warm, genuine smile on her face. "Effective immediately, Specialist Kjellstrom will be assigned a dual designation, Combat Medic and Tactical Support Specialist. This will allow her to operate in a dual capacity on future missions." And, effective next month, she will be officially approved to begin full-scale sniper training. This time, she won't have to hide. The words were not just a verdict, they were a revolution. Eleanor, who had prepared for the end of her career, now faced a new beginning. She was no longer just a medic, she was a sniper. She was a soldier who had been given a new name, a new purpose, a new path forward. Her years of secret training, her clandestine preparation, and her unwavering belief in her own capabilities had all been vindicated. She had not only saved a mission, she had changed the system. She had proven that a soldier was not a role, but a collection of capabilities. And her victory was not just her own, it was a victory for every soldier who had ever been underestimated. That night, back in her quarters, the quiet hum of her salvage terminal was a gentle presence in the room. The air was no longer filled with dread, but with a profound sense of peace. The ghost of the past, the tragic memory of the Marine she had failed to save, was finally gone. She was no longer a shadow, a whisper, a secret. She was a soldier, a healer, and a sniper. And her journey, which had begun in a moment of tragic loss, had ended in a moment of quiet, powerful triumph. As she sat at her desk, her mind filled with a sense of wonder and relief, the screen of her terminal suddenly flickered. A single encrypted message appeared, a ghost from the past, a silent partner in her long secret journey. The message was signed Echo 74, and it simply read, "They saw you. Now they know." Eleanor Kellstrom smiled. She was no longer alone. The precision she had learned from her father, the precision she had used to navigate the chaos of the battlefield, had not only saved lives, it had found her a place in a world that had tried so hard to deny her. Her journey was over, and her new life was just beginning. The rules had been rewritten, and she, the medic, the sniper, the hero, was the one who had held the pen. And so we come to the end of Eleanor's remarkable journey. It's a story that goes beyond the battlefield, serving as a powerful testament to the idea that true strength isn't always loud, and genuine capability often hides in the most unexpected of places. Eleanor defied every expectation placed upon her, not out of arrogance. Mas shuat fatu mot niem tin sao sak, rang su chuan biva longdung kam ko the thedoi so fun. Her journey reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes happen when one person dares to be more than their title, challenging a rigid system with nothing but skill and unwavering resolve. We want to hear what you think. Were you on the edge of your seat when Eleanor took that shot? Did Commander Rourke's change of heart surprise you? Or what did you think of Colonel Rain's incredible revelation? Share your thoughts on Eleanor's story in the comments below. We at Veteran Biker love hearing your perspective and building this community together. If this story resonated with you, if it left you feeling inspired by the power of courage and precision, then you found your home. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next upload, a new tale of extraordinary resilience and honor. Until then, if you're hungry for more narratives of triumph against all odds, take a look at the other standout stories on your screen right now. Click on any of them to dive back into a world where courage writes its own rules. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being a part of the Veteran Biker family. We'll see you in the next one.